Hello and welcome to another episode of Guess That Record. I am your host, Jackson Reed. This is the show where we talk about music and try to figure out which album I pulled from my collection. Thanks again to all our listeners for tuning in to another episode. Our guest is a Canadian blues musician, best known for his one-man band style of performing, handling vocals, guitar, and drums all at once. His newest album, Hanging on a String, is out now, and he'll be on tour across Canada this year. I'm pleased to welcome Steve Hill to Guess That Record. How are you doing, Steve?
I'm good.
Awesome. It's great to have you on the show today. And where
Great
are
to
we
be here with
talking to
you.
you from?
I'm in Trois-Rivières, Quebec. I'm actually at my step parents' place. I'm not even
Uh,
at my place, so
right.
I had to come pick up my dog. I came back from some. I was on the road for 4 days, and I came back like at two a.m. and I came here to pick up my dog. So, but here I am.
Awesome. And, I always like to start off these interviews by asking, what was the first song or the first album you remember listening to that made you take music seriously?
My dad used to listen to the Beatles and Elvis a lot. Uh, and I remember really liking that. I got a big brother who was into hard rock, so I have a very good memory of him buying Back in Black back in 1980 and hearing that. Um, but the first album that I bought, actually the first 45 was Van Halen Jump. I wanted to buy the LP, but my mom wouldn't let me buy it because it had an angel smoking a cigarette on the cover, and she
Right.
wouldn't allow that in the house. So I bought the 45 instead. But I was really impressed by Van Halen. I remember really being into ZZ Top Eliminator. Also, my big brother had the tape, and I'd steal it from him all the time, and I'd get beat up. And so these are like my first early influences. Yeah.
all good stuff. And for those who sort of aren't familiar with your music, the interesting thing about your style is that you often perform as a one man band,
hmm
and so that's where you're singing, playing guitar, and playing drums all at once.
Yeah.
And I was kind of curious how you sort of put together that format, how you started doing that.
Well, I had been a professional musician for almost 20 years when I started doing that. I started doing that in 2011, and it just, it was an accident basically. I had just released an album that tanked. The record company didn't promote it, they didn't get their grant money, so they didn't promote it at all. And I had just become a partner in a studio in Montreal, and I thought the studio had clients, but they did not. So I had this huge mortgage every month, and I couldn't pay the bills. So I told my agent at the time. I gave him a list of smaller clubs, places where I used to play when I was younger, and I told him to book some solo shows. And during the week at night, I'd go down to the studio. I was living, right upstairs, and so I just go down to the studio. It was always available. I couldn't afford a band. I couldn't afford an engineer, so I was doing everything by myself. And at first, it was just guitar, vocals, and I would foot stomp, put a microphone on the floor. Then eventually I got a bass drum and I did a few tracks like that. And after a while, I was like, I got this other leg. I might as well use it. So I got a hi hat. And with that setup, I did Solo Recordings Volume 1, all recorded live in the studio. And that was, I believe, my seventh album. And it outsold everything that I had done before. And I got a Juno nomination with it. It won Blues Album of the Year in Memphis at the International Blues Challenge. And I did a bunch of shows with it. So then I did Solo Recordings Volume 2. And, as I went along, I kept adding stuff. I started modifying my guitars to get a bass sound. I have an extra pickup, and it's a bit technical, but what you hear is a bass and a guitar. And I got a snare drum that I'm playing with a kick drum pedal. And at some point, I figured, I wanted to be able to hit a cymbal. So I figured a way to have a drumstick on the guitar's headstock. So I'm playing the cymbal and the hi hat with it. And then I did Volume 2, which came out in 2015, which won the Juno and 7 Maple Blues Awards. Then I did Volume 3, and it's a project I thought I'd do for about a year, pay off the credit cards, but I'm still doing it 14 years later, and I'm still really enjoying it. My latest album has been recorded live in the studio as a one-man band at Dave Grohl's studio, Studio 606 in Los Angeles, and I had a great team of engineers there. Daryl Thorpe, the producer, he's a 10-time Grammy winner, who's worked not only with the Foo Fighters, but I mean with Beck, Paul McCartney, you name it. And they made me sound so good on this record. And so I'm, it's just, I never thought I'd be a one-man band. I was quite happy as a guitar player. But it's, I find, in my career, if I plan something, it doesn't happen. But life throws you curveballs and you have to adjust to it. And I became a one man band, and I'm still a one man band, and I find ways to push the push what I'm doing a bit further, and with every album and with every tour, actually, So, and it's something that you have to work hard at. It's not easy to do, physically, mentally, and that keeps me really interested in playing music. I've been doing this for 30 years. Being a professional musician. So it's good to have something new. If I was just playing guitar, maybe I wouldn't be as interested in music as I am now. Because I have to work really hard at it, and.
Hmm. And it's kind of funny. I was going to ask you, and you were just talking about the physical side of it, because I'm a singer and a guitar player myself, and there are times where like I find a song and I'm like, there's no way I could sing and play this at the same time. Like there's a lot going on here, and it's crazy to think of like singing, playing guitar, and then also remembering to play the drums at the same time. So how do you kind of work all that out?
Well, I guess it's like levels, like let's say we're walking, and we're talking, we're breathing, probably thinking about something else too, and we're used to doing that, so it's the same thing, I guess, but it takes a lot of practice, and it takes time, that's all there is to it, but that being said, physically, at first it was really hard, because I'm doing it standing up also, so there's like a lot of muscles that you don't usually use that much that have to, like my legs are not the same as they were before. They really they physically changed. And it's just I have back problems. I have a bunch of physical problems that come with it, but it also comes with being 50 years old. So but when I'm playing, I'm trying not to think too much. I'm not thinking the bass drum has to be doing that, the bass line has to be doing that. It's like one chart, but it's like, yeah, it's not just playing. It's like, you play guitar, so like finger style guitar. You got the thumb going,
Hmm.
doing the bass, and the other finger is doing that. So it's just that, but with the whole body.
This episode of Guess That Record is sponsored by Marvel Marketing. Marvel Marketing is an award winning digital marketing company headquartered in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, working with clients in different industries from all over North America, including Canada, the United States, and Mexico. Marvel Marketing services include website design and development, website maintenance, search engine optimization, public relations services, and social media management, amongst others. To find out more, visit marvelmarketing.ca. This episode of Guess That Record is sponsored by Guitar Works. One of Canada's top independent music stores for over 30 years, Guitarworks carries a huge selection of musical instruments from the biggest brands of music, including Gibson, Fender, Martin, Yamaha, and Paul Reed Smith. Visit any of their 3 Calgary locations or shop online at guitarworks.ca and join the Guitar Perks program to earn money back with every purchase. Guitarworks, your total guitar store. This episode of Guess That Record is also sponsored by Recordland, home to the largest selection of music in Canada. Buy, sell, and trade tapes, CDs, and vinyl. Located in Calgary's Inglewood neighborhood on 9th Avenue Southeast, visit them in person or on Instagram at Recordland Calgary. I would actually like to ask you a bit about your guitar playing, because I noticed you do sort of play with a finger picking sort of style there. Almost kind of reminded me of how Lindsey Buckingham plays
Okay.
guitar a bit. So yeah, how did you sort of come up with that?
Well, I'm left-handed, but I play guitar right-handed, and I tried every different technique. I started with a pick, and then I tried finger style. It wasn't easy at first. I tried the thumb pick. I tried finger picks, hybrid picking. But basically, when I was 15, I bought King and the Delta Blues Singers by Robert Johnson, and I was
Hmm.
already into Muddy Waters and that all these great blues players, and a lot of these guys played with their fingers. And if you're trying to play Robert Johnson with a pick, you just can't do it. And then I got into slide guitar playing. So the greatest slide guitar players, they all play with their fingers because you have to mute the other strings for them not to resonate. So like Dwayne Allman, he'd play with his fingers when he'd play slide. He'd play with a pick if he didn't play slide, but he'd drop the pick if he was playing slide. And so like on my first couple of records, I guess my playing was like 50-50, the pick and the fingers. And like live, sometimes I'd start a song with the fingers and get into a solo, and if it would get like really intense, I'd grab a pick. And I remember like in 2003, I was doing a gig, and I had just spent like 2 or 3 months. It was winter time, and I spent like 2 or 3 months playing slide, like practicing 6-8 hours a day with my fingers. Then I went to do a gig, and it got intense. So I grabbed the pick, and all of a sudden it felt like I didn't have the same power, didn't have the same. It was not as accurate as with the fingers, and there's it's a different sound. I prefer the sound that I get with the fingers, and that's just for me, for what I do. And um, I think I have more of my own style when I'm playing with the fingers than when I used to play with a pick. And these days I can't even play with a pick. It's been over 20 years since I haven't used one. And it allowed me to be a one-man band because it allows me to play the bass lines with my thumbs. I use the thumb on my left hand a lot too. I got pretty big thumbs, so that helps. And it's just my style of playing, and so I'm playing the bass lines and I'm playing the chords and I'm doing the lead at the same time. And that really comes from being into the Delta blues guys, mostly Robert Johnson, who would sound like a whole, like 2 or 3 guitar players with just one guitar.
Absolutely, yeah. And it was interesting to hear that you're left-handed, but you play right-handed. Because there's another, of course, famous guitar player I know of that is in the same situation, and it's Mark Knopfler, and he's
Yep.
also he's also a finger
Yeah.
picking guitarist.
And
So,
actually, I almost mentioned Dire Straits earlier when you asked me about my first influential records. I bought that when I was in 6th grade, and it really, I think it was the first time I really heard a guitar sing. And I listened to Brothers in Arms, I mean, for a year every day. I was so much into that record, and he's a huge influence, and he played with his fingers, yeah. And
mhm.
you're right, he's a lefty.
Yeah, yeah. And one thing I was kind of curious to ask you about, and you sort of alluded to it earlier, how you switched to the one man band format almost to kind of pay the bills. I was kind of curious to learn a bit about how touring works as a one man band, and like, of course that's always sort of the thing with music, is that it can be a bit challenging when you've got a full band and you've got all of these people and instruments you got to worry about. How does that change when it's just yourself out there?
Well, it's as much as it's as much equipment as a trio. So it's basically it's not a full drum kit, but it's just I don't have a tom and I don't have a floor, but aside from that, it's a full drum kit, and there's a bass amp, two guitar amps. I use a bunch of different tunings, so I got a tour with at least three guitars. So usually I got a backliner, I got a sound man. It's we're three on the road. Going out west, I'm touring Saskatchewan, Alberta, and BC in the next couple of weeks. And over there, I got a tour manager who's a sound man. So
Mhm.
it's just two of us. So it's a lot more work. But it allows me to do these tours. I last night I was playing here in Quebec, and I just did like four shows in 3 days here, and these days the opening I'm the opening act and I'm the main act, so I open the show as a one-man band and I do another set with a drummer and a bass player. So I still do both, but I mostly tour as a one-man band. I couldn't afford to go out west with a trio and a crew.
Mhm.
It's just not possible. So and it allowed me to do a lot of touring in Canada in the last 10 years that I wouldn't have been able to do if I would have been touring with a band. Same thing in Europe and in the UK. I did a bunch of tours. Before COVID, I was playing a lot more in Europe and the UK than in Canada for a couple of years there. I was mostly playing Germany and the UK, and it would have been impossible with a band. It's just,
Mhm.
it's just impossible unless
Yeah.
you have huge backing, tour support and all that. And it's not really something that record labels have for a blues-based artist these days. You know.
Yeah. But that's it's great that you've kind of found a way to make it all work.
Yeah, and
Um
I found my own sound with it also, like I've done 12 records so far, and in the early years I would go like from one style and to another. Well, it's always like between blues and rock and roll, but I don't think I had my sound yet, and with the one man band, with the limitations of being a one man band, and there's also limits to what I can do on the guitar, because I got to do the bass line and I got the bass pick up there. So you can't do fifths on the bottom strings because it's just
mhm,
mud. So I had to change the whole thing. But it made me, it allowed me to find my sound, to find my musical identity. So
for sure. And then you've got a new album out right now called Hanging on a String.
yeah.
And I was sort of curious, what's it about, and how was it put together?
Well, I've had a bunch of accidents in the last couple of years. Had a car accident a week after I released the album that came out before this one, Dear Illusion. And then I was touring out west. I was in Calgary 2 years ago, and I actually woke up in a house on fire.
Mm,
And out of that, it's a long story, but I posted, that was the last. After the last show of the tour, I woke up at my tour manager's place, and I was in the basement and it was full of smoke. And I woke him up, and we called the fireman, and the house was okay, but we could have died there. And so after that, I always do a post when I'm on the plane before we take off, and I posted, woke up in a house on fire, just did 10 shows in 11 days. I'm going back home. And my friend, Brian Laudenschlager, who's got a microphone company out in California called Loudon Audio, saw the post. And he happened to be at Studio 606 with Daryl Thorpe when he saw that. And I've known these two guys for about 7 or 8 years. I was hired by Loughton Audio years ago to do the NAM show, and we did a few events like that, musical industry events, where Daryl was the star of those events, and I was the one man band. It was great for a microphone company because with just one guy, he can put his kick drum microphone, vocal microphone, all of his different type of microphones just with one guy. So we did a few of those events, and ever since then, Brian would always tell me, like, you got to come and record in California, and he saw that post and he wrote to me, and I called him back and he's like, man, I'm at 606. You got to come and record at 606. And like, I have a home studio. I usually do albums at my place. Sometimes I'm the engineer. I mix them myself. And but this time, a week after that house on fire incident, Brian calls me back and he's like, "Man, I've booked the studio." And he booked Daryl, and he decided to produce the album, and he paid for the studio and for the engineers and all of that. So I had 3 months to get ready to write an album, learn how to perform it live, because that's what the guy was. That's what they both wanted. They wanted me to do takes, live takes. So worked. I wrote these songs and practiced for 3 months. Went to L.A., and my friend Johnny Pilgrim, who I co-wrote the lyrics with, he lives in L.A. Comes pick me up at the airport. 15 minutes later, at a stop sign, somebody ran on a red light straight into us. I got broken ribs, and tried to record the album, but after a few days, the producers decided to postpone the whole thing. So I went back 3 months later and did it in 5 days. So most of the songs, the song "Hanging on a String" is about all these times where I've escaped death. Uh, over the years, from touring, you're going to run into some accidents. If you do it for
Hmm.
30 years. And the album is about the times we're living in. It's about music, the state of the musician with AI. It's about the everything that is happening in the world right now, and music as the salvation. Music has always been there for me, and it's always going to be there. And it's a very personal album. Like a song like "Show Ya" is really it's my story. It's the story of a guy who starts with tennis racket, pretending to play guitar, playing air guitar, and then he gets his first guitar at 13, starts playing clubs when he's 16, turns pro at 18, gets screwed by a record label, uh, but he's still touring years later in a car, but still really enjoying what he does. So
Hmm.
it's a very personal album, but at the same time, the themes are pretty universal.
Hmm. Yeah. And that's because I'm based here in Calgary, so that's kind of interesting that it all sort of started here
Yeah,
in a
yeah.
way. Hmm. Yeah.
I love Calgary. I got a lot of friends there. I have backline at Slaughterhouse Studio.
Oh yeah,
Um, I don't know if you've heard of the place.
I have.
Uh,
Yeah.
okay, so I got a drum kit there, and my friend Ray Lemley, who hosts the jams at the Blues Can. He's been a friend for a long time, and he's such a cool dude, and he introduced me to all of his friends over there. Bob, who owns Slaughterhouse, my tour manager over there, Nate, and just a great bunch of guys into music, and it's a cool music city, and I'm happy to be back at the Ironwood. I haven't been there in a long time, and it's a place that I really really enjoy.
Hmm. I headlined there with my band
Oh yeah.
in August, so
Okay.
yeah, I'm familiar with it too. Anyways, we've reached the end of the interview. I want to thank Steve Hill for taking the time to be on the podcast. It was great
Thanks, Jackson.
to chat with you and learn about your story.
Yeah, man. Nice talking to you.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Guess That Record. Make sure to leave a 5-star review wherever you listen and tell your friends to check us out. I also want to shout out our radio partners currently airing Guess That Record as a syndicated show. CKMS in Kitchener, Ontario, CKXU in Lethbridge, Alberta, and South Devon Sound in Kingsbridge, UK. So if you're in those markets, be sure to check those stations out to hear the show. If you're with a radio station and you'd be interested in adding Guess That Record to your programming, send us an email to guessthatrecordpodcast@gmail.com. We'd also appreciate it if you follow us on Instagram and TikTok, where our username on both platforms is @GuessThatRecord. And lastly, subscribe to our YouTube channel to see the video versions of these amazing interviews. Remember to keep rockin', and we'll see you on the next episode of Guess That Record.